Hello, brothers, sisters, and friends, and welcome to the Fight Like Hell podcast. This is the official podcast of the National Association of Letter Carriers, the union that represents over 290,000 active and retired letter carriers employed by the United States Postal Service. I'm your host, Eddie Morgan, and with me, as always, is our national president, Brian Renfro. Hey, Brian, how are you today?
Hey, Eddie, doing great. Glad to be back on for another episode, and we've got several interesting topics today, so let's get at it.
Yeah, three things we got to talk about today. So last week you were in Region 6. How'd that go?
Yeah, it went great. Region 6 has a long history of having their regional training, KIM training, they call it. Region 6 they call themselves the KIM region because the three states in Region 6 are Kentucky, Indiana, and Michigan. And they've had it on this holiday weekend for as long as I've been around. So really a long time. And it's something, honestly, I look forward to every year. I spend the morning of that holiday with the folks there in Region 6. And just like every other year, they had excellent training. And we had a great few hours on Monday morning, the holiday, just talking about everything that's going on. A lot of the kind of things we've talked about on this podcast. So it's good to see everybody there. I think they had about 450 people attend. So that's folks from all over Region 6 that were there and took part in a lot of good training that will continue to make the things that we do for our members even better.
So when you go to these trainings, you get up and speak. Is that kind of like a State of the Union that you give?
Yeah, something like that. I just try to give people that are in the room, in this case, it's, branch leaders and shop stewards. And I just try to give them as much information as I possibly can on things that are going on. I always give them the opportunity to ask questions and, answer any questions. It kind of depends on where it is. If I'm doing a state convention, our state associations they exist per our Constitution to advance the union's legislative goals. So I tend to focus it a little more heavily on the legislative stuff, just because that's, beyond the normal administrative things that a state association has to do, like elect officers and resolutions and things like that. I mean, that's the primary reason that they hold a convention. And, but yeah, I just cover all sorts of stuff. In this case, it's all about our preparation for collective bargaining, some updates on, things that are going on related to contract administration, a lot of which we've talked about on this podcast. Stuff like, training things that we're working on or are available, everything that's going on in DC on Capitol Hill, everything that's going on with the Postal Service, and things that are going on with our union. So just try to give them a really well-rounded update.
And next week, you're letting me out of my office. I'll be up at the Leadership Academy. So I'll be broadcasting live from up there. And it's Communications Week. So we'll be doing a lot of communication, writing, speech week, as it's called, to the students up there, where they'll practice giving a couple speeches. It's going to be a really exciting time. Can you take us back to when you went through your speech week?
Yeah, it's a long time ago. We have 3 separate weeks of Leadership Academy class, and they're all designed to be a little bit different intentionally. And this one, as you said, the thing that usually gets everyone a little on edge is public speaking. So when I went through public speaking back in Leadership Academy Class 6, which would have been, I guess, about 17 years ago now, we had this instructor for public speaking. At the time, he was the executive vice president of NALC. He later became president, and obviously one of my mentors, Fred Rolando. And, I had a lot of wonderful experiences with Fred over many, many, many years. But in this case, we gave him a nickname, and that was El Diablo, because he was pretty intense on the public speaking front. I think he entertained himself a little bit. He would make us prepare to give 2-minute speeches on like 10 different topics, and then make us play musical chairs, and that's how you figured out which topic, and you didn't know ahead of time. So he really kept you on your toes. So thankfully for me, the compared to what we see from a lot of people, not just in Leadership Academy, but in general, public speaking is something that some people are more afraid of public speaking than death. There's polls that show that. But for me, it was an enjoyable experience, and it's just an example of one of the skills, that we try to teach at the Leadership Academy.
So wish all those students luck next week. Good luck.
They'll do great, no doubt. Great group.
And if not, we'll have a gurney right by this stage and then carry them all. We had to move the schedule around a little bit for Leadership Academy because you have executive council coming in next week. They're going to be still working on the same thing with the bargaining committees, and is that correct, or what are they doing?
Yeah, primarily collective bargaining stuff. We will spend time over a couple of days next week meeting as a council to discuss some things related to collective bargaining. Obviously, we'll talk about the economic piece, which we do as a council, but there'll also be time for the council members to continue the work that they're doing on each of their collective bargaining committees. So they are here next week, and then a couple of weeks after that, we'll have them back here. They're still, meeting with their committees and doing work for preparation in between. So, as we've talked about before, our preparation is pretty wide ranging. Obviously the council is the centerpiece of that. And, we're excited to continue that work next week and over the course of the next few weeks and months.
So getting into our first topic, it's kind of a carryover to what we talked about last week. We have another interpretive dispute, and this one is the joint evaluation and adjustment of city letter carrier assignments within an established S&DC. And before we get into what that interpretive dispute, I think we really got to pull back a little bit and talk about what an S&DC is. Some of our listeners or viewers might not know, might have heard the term, but they might not know what exactly it is. If you're getting moved into an S&DC, it's the most important thing in your career or your work life. But some of our other members might not know exactly what that is. So could you explain what the S&DC is and why the USPS is going to that model of delivery?
Sure. So S&DC stands for Sorting and Delivery Center. The Postal Service a few years ago now, I guess 3 years ago or so, it released a plan called the Delivering for America plan. And it was a really comprehensive plan of their view of the future of the Postal Service. And it included all sorts of stuff from, legislative reforms, like policy changes that needed to be made, some of which have already been done that we were supportive of, such as the Postal Reform Act of 2021. It also included some pretty significant operational and infrastructure changes to the Postal Service's processing network and facilities, and then also changes to delivery units and the change, at least to a significant portion of our delivery units around the country. And the most, I guess, visible piece of that, of the changes on the delivery side of things, were the creation of these sorting and delivery centers. And on one hand, this is new under the name Sorting and Delivery Center. On the other hand, over the Postal Service's history, we've had other things like delivery unit optimization 15 or so years ago. Back in the 90s, when I was in high school, they had something called delivery redesign, which incorporated an element of this. So over time, there have been different efforts to move people around. But with this current effort or initiative, in a sorting and delivery center, the Postal Service will take what normally is a pretty large building, and then they will move delivery units within a certain radius. Normally, I think they start with the idea of 30 minutes or less of travel, and move several different delivery units into one facility. And they call that facility a sorting and delivery center. And the reason, this is their reason, that they gave both in the plan itself and then, of course, we've had a lot of communication with them about this over the years, is to alleviate the problems that almost every letter carrier listening to this will have some familiarity with, and that's the issue with mail processing and then transportation of mail to delivery units. So and this part is 100% true. Over the years, we've had an increasing problem in delivery units where the operation on the delivery side, when we come in and clock in and start casing mail and get out to the street, has been hampered by inconsistencies and problems with transportation. Basically, the mail not being there when it should be there. So the Postal Service's idea here is over on the mail processing side, they're creating these really large processing centers. Within closer proximity to those processing centers, they create these large sorting and delivery centers where our routes are located, where letter carriers go to work, so that they can more easily transport mail from processing to delivery. So rather than having a lot of different transportation routes going all over the place, you've got a whole lot of mail making one trip, or probably on multiple, trucks and things like that. But that was sort of the stated reason for them doing this. So they began a couple years ago implementing these. We have put in a process that I'm sure we'll talk a little bit about in just a minute of trying to resolve the natural problems that come up. But in general, it involves relocating routes. So the carrier reports to a sorting and delivery center, but the location of their route doesn't change. So they report to the sorting and delivery center, case their mail, load their vehicle. And in a lot of cases, you've got increased travel to your first delivery. And, Post Service did this knowing that it was going to increase some travel. So we've got a number of these implemented around the country now. Some of them have been fairly smooth, the implementation. Some of them have been not so smooth, and those are for all kinds of reasons. They usually undertake pretty aggressive renovations and things like that of these buildings that they turn into sorting and delivery centers. So we've had things that range from issues with how just the physical condition of the building, it being ready for people to come in, the just operational stuff, such as the logistics of getting mail around the building and retrieving parcels and things like that. But for the most part, while it's the negative is clearly in cases where there's a pretty significant inconvenience to letter carriers. I mean, obviously there are some cases where it's letter carriers like it because it's better for them in terms of where they report to work. But most of those things are things that really we don't have a lot of control over. But when it comes to the issues in the S&DCs, we've done, I think, pretty well overall in being able to address them. So that has kind of been what they've done over the last couple of years in creating these. They have started with, I think, something like 800 of them they wanted to do. That number has been reduced as they've continued to modify the plan. I think it's effectively been cut in half. But we're at a place now where we're not really sure what the future looks like as far as new S&DCs. I think as most of these listeners know, we got a new Postmaster General in July. He has been in the job about 3 months now. He, in that 3 months, has not made any, real significant changes to the overall direction of the things they were doing, including the Delivery for America plan and implementing these S&DCs. And while he's publicly and privately, stated that the general direction of the Delivering for America plan he was supportive of, it kind of remains to be seen if there may be changes that he makes. And if he makes changes, that could definitely be modifications to the way they're doing these sorting and delivery centers, or really anything in the future. So we have to continue to, of course, deal with the issues contractually and otherwise that come up in each of these. But also we continue to communicate with them about what the future looks like. And, it may continue as it has, and they may continue with the plan as it's been laid out, or it may change going into the future. And, those of us that have been around the Postal Service for a while certainly wouldn't be surprised by them shifting directions. We've seen that many, many times over the years. So that's something we got to keep an eye on.
So just to kind of lay out the beginning of the dispute here. So like these carriers are being moved, like you just said, they're being moved in these S&DCs.
Mhm.
These aren't new jobs. So
Yep.
they're going to alter their routes and the times on their routes. That's correct, right?
Yeah. So if you just think about when a route is moved, let's say it's moved from one post office where you report, it's moved 20 minutes to another location. And that means every carrier there at the time they move from their first delivery to your last delivery, like your line of travel is the same, but you've increased your travel to and travel from the route. So, that puts us in a place where we clearly would need to evaluate those routes and create scenarios where a lot of routes might be overburdened because of that additional travel. So that was a big concern of ours from the very beginning of this is ensuring that we have a process in place that would allow us to evaluate the impact of the Postal Service moving them into this S&DC and then adjust those routes if necessary.
And then, so I guess, can we talk about what an MOU is and, what
Yeah,
is it? Just so that like we know, hey, we get a contract, we get an agreement,
sure.
but then there's all these other things along the way called MOUs. Can you just get in that a little bit?
Yeah. So if you look at our contract, we've spent time on this podcast talking about articles. There's all these articles that start with Article 1 and all the way to Article 43. And then there's also agreements that are included in the contract called memorandums of understanding that are part of collective bargaining, part of the contract, just like the language that's in the articles. We also, over many, many years now, have negotiated with the Postal Service agreements called memorandums of understanding to apply to all sorts of things between periods of collective bargaining. So just thinking back a little bit in history, we think of our route adjustment processes that we've had. Those things are laid out. We agree upon an MOU, and that MOU is in full effect, no different than our contract is. We've also done other agreements related to back in 2020 when the pandemic started. We did a whole series of agreements to make some temporary changes to improve safety. We've done MOUs on all sorts of things, basically anything you can think of. Those that may be familiar with our materials reference system, you would be able to go there and read MOUs going all the way back to the 70s. So on this issue that I just talked about of wanting to be sure we had a process of how we would evaluate and adjust those routes, the way we would do that is by negotiating an agreement, and that agreement would be a written agreement, would be a signed agreement by both parties in the form of a memorandum of understanding or an MOU.
So we have one of these with the Postal Service on the carriers moving into these S&DCs and their route adjustments.
We do. And I guess I should explain a little bit of the history of it because it's a little different than maybe some. So in our materials reference system, we have a numbering system, and the MOU that is currently in effect is M02006 or M2006. Initially, in I believe it was in either late 22 or early 2023, we negotiated an agreement with the Postal Service that included a lot of things about these S&DCs, including this route adjustment piece. And the route adjustment piece it used at the time was a joint route adjustment process that was in place beyond S&DCs. We were using this joint process around the country called TIAREAP, TIAREAP. That process expired last year, so it ended. which meant we had to come up with another process. So what we did, if you look at M 2006, it's an agreement that modifies a previous MOU. But in a nutshell, M 2006 and M 2007 is a document that explains what it means. We incorporated change language in that previous MOU by utilizing these new agreements that explained how this process was going to work. So today, when an S&DC is established, what happens in terms of evaluating and adjusting the routes happens pursuant to these two MOUs that we negotiated last fall. I believe they were signed in, I think, September of 2024. Spells out the process of what we do, and it's a joint process, and lays out the details of how it works, and also lays out some things that we've agreed upon as far as where it applies and that kind of thing.
Just if people want to look at these MOUs, where can they find them?
Yeah, just go to the website, go under the NALC.org, go under the Workplace Resources tab, and you'll see the materials reference system. Just click on that, and it's a pretty simple numbering system. You can just scroll down and see them right there, or you can type in the number 2000, 2006, or 2007, and you can read both of them in their entirety.
So with this route adjustment process, who watches it from our side?
Yeah, here we oversee it here at headquarters. One of our letter carrier staffers named Ron Osborne, who's exceptionally experienced in route adjustment, does the day-to-day work here, dealing with the Postal Service. When there is a dispute that he and his counterpart are unable to resolve, which is very rare, usually I'll get involved in it and resolve it, and that's just really because route adjustments is something I've done since 15 years ago when I walked in here. But Ron handles the vast majority of it from the headquarters level. Then, of course, at the regional level, in each of our NBA offices, either the business agent themselves or an REA is designated to be the person that has the oversight within their region.
Are the branches involved at all?
Yeah, I mean, there's a structure in place where the branches are, we choose team members on both sides, and then there's requirements for them to communicate with the branches. Obviously, our folks do that in a really a very similar way to what they've done over the years in our other joint route adjustment processes.
Do we provide any kind of training to our members that are going to have to go through these route adjustments?
Yeah, so for the people that are the team members are people that have been extensively trained, the people that are responsible for actually evaluating and then coming up with what the route adjustment would look like. For the carriers that are involved, part of the reason that we do it this way through the joint process is it doesn't require the carrier to do really much of anything more than what they normally do, and that's important. When we think of the Postal Service's unilateral process where they do a 6-day count, and I know some of you listening have dealt with that over the last year or so. The carrier has to fill out these forms every day, and there's a training piece that goes there. But for the carriers in this process, there's a consultation where they talk to the people that are doing the route adjustment, and really all they have to do is do their normal thing every day. And then when they have that consultation, just tell the folks what they know and what they think about their route. That's an important piece of this. So part of it is being as minimally invasive on the carriers as we possibly can, because ultimately the best thing to base a route adjustment on is what the carrier has been doing every day, and that's really what we want to get to.
All right, so let's get to the dispute.
Sure.
What has the post office done to make us file these papers?
Yeah, so what we have this issue is not really about the process itself as far as how we evaluate or adjust routes. It's about where it applies. And when we look at these S&DCs around the country, sometimes it's a building where there were never carriers in before. Often, frankly, it's old mail processing plants, and we move people in. Sometimes it's a building where carriers already work. yet we're going to fix up the building, change things they do, move other delivery units in, and call it an S&DC. So when we negotiated this, there is a line in the agreement that honestly, I put in the agreement for a reason, and it states this agreement applies to all city letter carrier routes impacted by the establishment of or relocation into an S&DC on or after the date was June 1st, 2024, because we did this agreement last year. So, very clearly for us, that means when the Postal Service creates an S&DC, whether it's the routes that are already in there that are impacted by creating this thing, or it's routes that are relocated into there, this is the process that we use. The dispute has been that in one of these S&DCs, at least one, the Postal Service has taken a position that while they moved other routes for other delivery units into this facility, the routes that are already there, this process doesn't apply, which means they've refused to jointly evaluate and adjust those routes and chosen instead to go do 6-day counts unilaterally on those routes. So the interpretive dispute is simply this: in our view, for them to go and unilaterally do a route adjustment there rather than doing what this agreement says they are going to do violates this agreement, which makes it a national level dispute. Certainly I won't speak for the Postal Service, but by their actions, it's clear that their view is that they think only those routes that are relocated into an S&DC are subject to this process. But as I said, the language in the agreement clearly says that it applies to routes impacted by the establishment of or relocation into. So, when you say it's impacted by this or this, and then they're basically taking a position that it only applies to relocation, that doesn't add up. And we have tried to resolve this with them for quite some time. And they have refused to come to an agreement, and basically we're left with, no other way to resolve this issue than to initiate an interpretive dispute.
So will this be handled the same way that we talked about the other two disputes last week? Will this be handled in the same process?
It will. It will be handled through the exact same process. It's something that we will discuss with them here in the near future, and hopefully try to find a resolve on it.
Okay. Let's get into our next topic here, and that would be the Protect Our Letter Carriers Act, HR 1065 or S.463. And the reason this brought to my mind, we had a carrier got shot while they were out delivering their mail in Everett, Washington. And that's not to take away from any carrier that's been harassed, shot, attacked, or murdered out on their route. But that was the latest one. And I just wanted, thoughts and prayers aren't cutting it for our letter carriers. They need to be protected. We need action. And I just want to kind of talk to you about what we've done in Congress and Congress's action to help protect letter carriers and what they've done so far.
Yeah, the Protect Our Letter Carriers Act is a bipartisan bill. It was first introduced in the last Congress. This problem with this increase we've seen in crime, which primarily the violence is normally it's robberies, but unfortunately, we've had other types of violent acts, like, as you mentioned, the one recently in Washington. We saw that increase significantly post-pandemic. So we, started to dig into it a few years ago, and you try to get to the root cause, and we found a few things. Number one, these are federal crimes, and they were prosecuted at incredibly low rates. At that point in time, over the last couple of years, this is in 2022, only about 14% of these crimes against postal employees, mostly against letter carriers, were resulted in both an arrest and a federal prosecution, which obviously is completely unacceptable. We also found that those that committed these crimes that were arrested, that were prosecuted, there was this crazy inconsistency with the sentencing. So we talked to a whole lot of people, obviously with the Postal Service and the Inspection Service, and who look, they take this issue very seriously, and tried to figure out the things that we could do to make a difference. Because look, this is unfortunately an issue that there's no switch that can be flipped that's going to change it. There's a lot of pieces, and it's a little bit like kind of turning a big ship here. But it really boiled down to one thing. A lot of, folks listening to this that have been letter carriers for some time will remember a time when nobody messed with letter carriers, even in neighborhoods that were otherwise crime ridden. I think there was just a mindset among people that, that's a federal employee. If I mess with a federal employee, I'm going to jail. Well, that's really what we have to make a reality. So we started doing a few things. Number one, we thought it was really important to just raise public awareness of this. Obviously the people that we serve every day support us and have no interest in seeing this kind of stuff happen. So we held rallies all over the country in a lot of different cities just to raise awareness, to generate media coverage locally. And we got a great response there. We began to see some prosecution rates go up in certain areas. Believe it or not, the United States Attorney's offices react to public pressure. But we knew that there were also things related to the laws that were in place that really needed to change. And this legislation started with a conversation that I had with Congressman Brian Fitzpatrick. He's a Republican from Pennsylvania, from kind of suburban Philadelphia, and a staunch supporter of letter carriers. And he spent most of before he was in Congress, his professional career, he was an FBI agent. And the conversation, honestly, was not so much initially about legislation. It was more about like asking from his law enforcement background. And of course, he, wanted to help. And ultimately, what we landed on was introducing a bill. So he introduced this bipartisan bill with Congressman Greg Landsman from Ohio, and then over in the Senate, Senator Kristen Gillibrand from New York, and is the Democrat. Senator Josh Hawley from Missouri is the Republican, and they if that doesn't tell you it's a bipartisan bill, I don't know what will. So we were really happy to get it introduced in that Congress and reintroduced in this Congress.
That's a great point that you were talking about. Bipartisan letter carriers. Lots of times don't want to be involved in politics. But they're saying, no, that's not my side of the aisle or whatever. But this is both sides of the aisle. We're a union that talks bipartisanship and then walks bipartisanship. Can you talk about what's in this bill that would help protect letter carriers?
Yeah, so it's really got three primary changes that would be made. The first has to do with appropriating money for infrastructure. And the vast majority of these crimes that we saw were robberies and people trying to gain access to the mail. So according to the Inspection Service, basically what happened is during the pandemic in 2020, crime with the mail rose just across the board, which led to, folks wanting to access the mail. A lot of the robberies are people trying to rob our error keys because that gives them the access. So the Postal Service, to their credit, had been testing and ramped up to the extent they could some electronic alternatives that would replace the error key. And they tested a few different methods, and they've begun to implement them, as many as they can. But the fact is there's 9 million locks around the country, and So it's a big project. So the bill, the Protect Our Letter Carriers Act, would appropriate, I think it's a total of $7 billion over a period of years of money to fully replace the Postal Service's AirLock key system, which includes every single lock that's out there. It includes all the collection boxes that have these locks, replacing them with the higher, more secure collection boxes with electronic locks. Of course, replacing the keys that letter carriers that we use every single day. Part of it is, obviously the money helps pay for it, but the money can help speed up this full replacement. So that's a piece of it, replacing those keys, which is important, because what happens is if somebody gets their hands on an air key, as letter carriers know, you can go unlock locks probably for as far as you can drive, in most places. The inspection service tells us there are literal bounties on the street in a lot of places for these keys of thousands of dollars. With an electronic key, whether there's a couple different solutions that are out there, it really devalues that key. So that electronic key can be programmed to only work on that route. It can be used, through the scanner. Think of if you stayed in a Hilton or a Marriott hotel, or with their digital key on your phone, like that type of technology. So it creates it devalues it so that they would not, hopefully no longer be that sort of target of the robbery. So full replacement of that key system is number one, and the bill appropriates money to do it. The second big thing that it does is it designates a prosecutor in each U.S. Attorney's office to prioritize prosecuting crime against postal employees. Those low prosecution rates are really concerning, because if we want those that may think about committing these crimes to have the mindset that we all think people had for all these years, that's a federal employee. If I attack that employee, I am going to jail. We got to make that a reality. And in order for that to happen, when one of these crimes takes place, the inspection service investigates it. They do an excellent job doing that. They arrest someone, it has to be prosecuted. And the truth is, all across the country, the United States attorney's offices are all different. If this happens in, some parts of the country, you may have a pretty good chance of them being prosecuted. If it happens in, I won't throw out one specifically, but just take the ones that we often see in political type stuff, several around New York City, for example. Their priorities right now might be other things. So what this bill would do is designate a prosecutor in every U.S. attorney's office to improve the prosecution. And then finally, the third thing is it would change the federal sentencing guidelines for those that commit crime against postal employees. I am, of course, not a lawyer, and I won't pretend to know exactly how this works, but there is some sort of matrix that is used. So a federal judge who has the sentencing authority over someone that's convicted of one of these crimes, currently we have seen such discrepancies. We've seen crimes where someone has been sentenced to 7 or 8 years, and we've seen others that have been committed the same crime and been sentenced to as little as 30 days. What this bill would do would change those sentencing guidelines so that they would be the same as crime committed against a federal law enforcement officer. So should this legislation be enacted, which we're work really hard to doing, and we're making some progress, crime against a postal employee, someone convicted of those crimes would face the same sentencing guidelines as if that crime had been committed against a federal law enforcement officer. So appropriates money to replace all the airlock keys, the entire system, designates a prosecutor in every U.S. attorney's office to prosecute these crimes, and changes the sentencing so that people that commit crimes against postal employees would be subject to the same guidelines as crimes committed against federal law enforcement officers.
So the last couple episodes, we were talking about contract nerds. Now we're going to get into a little bit of legislation nerds like you and I.
Mm-hmm.
Can you just talk about the bill's introduced? And now we're talking about co-sponsorship. Can you talk about why we need co-sponsorship and what that is?
Yeah. So, co-sponsor, I mentioned the original sponsors of the bill. Co-sponsors are just, members of Congress can sign on. It's an indication of their support. Currently this bill in the House has 147 co-sponsors, 130 Democrats and 17 Republicans. Over on the Senate side, it has 8 Democrats and 1 Republican. And having a majority of co-sponsors in the House is particularly important because it demonstrates the support. So if that bill was to come to the floor of the House, it shows that it would pass. Also shows that if this bill was attached to some other piece of legislation, that the majority of the House supports it. So it's important that we continue to grow those co-sponsors because it demonstrates support for the bill, both in the short term and the long term. Because this is something that keeping postal employees safe, we shouldn't find any opposition to. So while we work to continue to grow those co-sponsors, our members are great out there. They contact their member of Congress and ask them to co-sponsor the bill, and we encourage them to continue to do that. One last thing, Eddie, I'll touch on. There has been some activity recently, not in the last couple of weeks when the government's been shut down, but prior to that, we have had some activity. In the House, the Government Operations Subcommittee, which is a subcommittee of the larger House Committee on Oversight and Reform, held a hearing on crime a few months ago now. I testified in that hearing along with folks from the Inspection Service and the OIG and my brother Frank Albergo, the president of the Postal Police Officers Union. And, we, in that hearing, I just sent a really strong message. If you want to protect the mail, you got to protect the people that deliver the mail. And, there was a lot of conversation about a lot of different things in that hearing, but there was one thing in that hearing that Congress, who was holding this hearing, could do to help, and that is pass this bill. So since that hearing, we've seen it pick up a little steam, so to speak. It's been discussed a lot more according to, what folks tell us on the Hill. Look, unfortunately, when we have these events happen, we had that recently in Everett, Washington. Just a few weeks ago, we had a rash of robberies and attacks in Rochester, New York, for example. I think we had like 5 in less than 2 weeks. When these things happen around the country, we definitely point out to the members that represent those constituencies where it happens. And so over time, we've started to see a little bit of a groundswell. As far as opportunities to get this passed in this Congress, not really based on the topic of this legislation. This is really true for almost any bill. This House of Representatives has done almost no legislating outside of one pretty large piece of legislation. So, it's really unclear if there will be a really good opportunity. The Republicans have talked about potentially doing a bill related to crime. Of course, if they did, this would naturally, be a piece that could fit in there. So I would just say to our members, keep working your members of Congress. If they're a co-sponsor, thank them for being a co-sponsor. If they're not a co-sponsor, ask them to be a co-sponsor. And, we'll continue to work and push, to look for any opportunity to get this passed, because it's something that really, really matters to us, both in the short term and then, of course, also in the long term.
And where do they want to go if they want to educate themselves on this bill and any of the other NALC endorsed bills? Where are we going to send our listeners and viewers today?
Yeah, just go to our website. It's nalc.org, and we have an action center set up there where you can learn anything you want to learn. You can very easily take action. It's very simple. If you just go to nalc.org and under the Government Affairs tab, it's real easy to find that. And normally something's going to be pretty prominent on the front page too. So But I encourage everybody to go check that out and look at that Legislative Action Center under the Government Affairs tab on our website.
So instead of having an Ask the Mailbag segment this week, I looked around the internet and social media, and I had to burn my eyes a couple times and get through it. But I found a few questions on there that I want to bring up to you. So they're not going to have names or branches here, but here's some of the questions I found.
Mm-hmm.
Are the congressional offices still open during the shutdown?
Yes.
Okay. Is the post office affected by the shutdown?
Not directly, thankfully. We are off budget, not taxpayer funded. So we are not directly impacted by the shutdown, which is look, really good when, we see what's happening right now with our brothers and sisters that are other federal employees, such as, air traffic controllers, for example, being put in a position to where, you're an employee has to come to work because you're considered an essential employee, but yet you don't get paid is just horrible, horrible. So thankfully we are not affected by the shutdown.
So we're going to get our checks every 2 weeks?
Yep. No change in anything related to the shutdown as far as the Postal Service and our pay.
Okay. What about retirees? Are they still going to get their pay?
Yes. Everything for our retirees, there's no impact because the money that retirees are paid is money that you've paid in. It's money that the Postal Service has paid in. It's not money that's appropriated by Congress. So the shutdown is really related to, things that Congress has to appropriate every single year. And, a time like this illustrates when we look back at, for example, this spring when the Trump administration was very close to an executive order to move the Postal Service under the Department of Commerce. The model of being an independent agency of the government that's been in place for 55 years has served us well. We have, advocated that in a number of different scenarios and, situations over time. But when a shutdown happens, it emphasizes that even more, that we are not subject to the whims of Congress or in this case, Congress's inaction and inability to govern, and do what they were elected to do.
Two more I got for you. One, letter carriers are noticed. They're going on Light Blue to make sure they're getting the work hours, they're getting paid correctly. They're finding a new line on there called Penalty Plus. Can you talk about that for a second?
Yeah, that's the implementation of the new pay rate. It was part of the 2023 agreement. So any letter carrier that works over 12 hours in a day or 60 hours in a week for whatever reason is going to be paid 2.5 times their pay. And is Penalty Plus is what the payroll department at the Postal Service has determined that they would call it. So that's what you should see show up there.
And the final question is, on the website, some of our letter carriers members noticed that the grievance starters are missing. Are they going forever? Are they coming back? Like, what's going on with that?
No. Just being updated. And they'll be back. I mean, a lot of them we've got this extensive, library now, grievance starters, and due to changes in the collective bargaining agreement, obviously the most recent one, but honestly, even some before that, it's just a good time to go through and get them all updated. So grievance starters are not going away.
And can you just, for someone that might not even know what they are, a new steward, can you just talk about what grievance starters are?
Yeah, sure. So we created grievance starters over the years on topics that are fairly common, things that we deal with locally. For example, just think of in your office the type of grievances that you may file, things like Article 8 violations and so on. And the idea is just to it's basically like a template that saves you work more than anything else, but also serves as a guideline. So it's exactly what it says it is. It's a starter. It's almost like a template for you to go in. You have to still do the work and plug in, the appropriate information from the documentation that you request, and and all that stuff. But it's designed to do two things. One, to make things a little more efficient for you. And number two, the outcome is it just better grievances in terms of the ensuring we include the documentation, that we make the right arguments, and then of course at Formal A and going forward that we frame the issue in the grievance appropriately.
I'm glad. I know our Formal A and Step B and branches love you hear you saying that. You have to start to do the work on this stuff, but it's a good jumping off.
No, you still got, and look, we are always looking for additional ways. I mean, I've for a while now had this vision of, incorporating all the grievance starters and that sort of stuff into some kind of computer program that was like picture like TurboTax for grievances. And there's a lot of that stuff that I think we can continue to build and tools to make available with all the technology that's out there today. But kind of grievance starters are sort of the basis for all that kind of thing. So we're all about efficiency, but we got to do the work. Most importantly, get the right documents in the file. That's the most important thing. Second most important thing is that we frame the issue. The third most important thing is that based on the issue we frame and the documents and the facts that we're able to establish, that we make the right contractual arguments in a contract case and point out where the Postal Service has failed and their burden of proof in a discipline case.
So with our next segment is going to be the third installment of roundtable discussion with the rank and file bargaining committees. And this group is the newer members. Do you just want to talk about this roundtable that we're going to listen to now?
It was a lot of fun. We had a great group of 10. I wish I could have had all 10 on, but the 4 we had, as you'll hear, were great. And I was just so, excited and energized by the work they did. And I think that'll shine through in listening to them. We even, I wanted to, nobody liked the term newer members, including me. But we struggled to come up with something else. So, I didn't tell them that in advance and ask them their thoughts. So I think everyone should definitely enjoy listening to this group. It's a really special group of people.
Okay, so let's check that out.
All right, we're happy to be joined by 4 additional members of our rank and file bargaining committee. In previous episodes, we've heard from folks that served on the branch leaders group and people that worked with the contract enforcers group. And now we're really happy to have 4 members of what we call the newer member group, because we still cannot come up with a better name for it. But I'm really excited to have the 4 of you here. I think your perspective will be really interesting to our listeners. And I can, as we'll get into a little bit, I can tell you guys that, at least in the limited exposure I had to the work that was done during the week, I just thought it was really inspiring, kind of some of the perspectives that you all shared, and we'll get in and discuss that. But to start with, I'm going to let each of you introduce yourselves. Just tell us a little bit about where you're from and your branch and whatever you want to share, and then we'll dig right in. Veronica, let's start with you.
Hi, everyone. I'm Veronica Ramirez from Branch 2810, Arlington Heights, Illinois, which is Region 3. I am the recording secretary for my branch, as well as the informal A steward.
Awesome. Linda?
Hi, I'm Linda Johnson. I'm from Branch 114 in Duluth, Minnesota. I'm currently the vice president of my branch. We have a pretty big branch. We've got about 90 routes in our office alone. So
Excellent. Kelsey?
Hi, my name's Kelsey Crosbie. I am from Branch 78 in Columbus, Ohio. We have a pretty large installation. We cover about 16 city routes and 20 AO stations. I am a shop steward. I am an organizer for the Ohio 2 district. I'm the formal A rep for the city of Columbus. I'm a branch trustee. I was the NALC subject matter expert for Ohio 2, and I actually just got into Step B training. So next November,
Awesome.
in November. Yeah.
All right. And Vinny.
Hi, yes, good evening. I'm Vincent Smith. I'm from Branch 12 out of Worcester, Massachusetts. I'm a shop steward for the town of Air, for my office rather. On top of that, I'm also the health benefit rep for our branch, as well as an academy instructor.
Great. Well, thank you all for being here once again. And we're going to go through the week, a lot of the things that took place during the week, and get your thoughts and your perspectives. But I want to start with, once you were contacted and your availability was confirmed and you were scheduled to come take part in this, we admittedly didn't share a whole lot of information with you ahead of time, aside from, just generally what the group was going to be put together to do. This is the first time we had done this kind of thing, at least in this structure. But I'm curious, and I think it'll be interesting to our listeners to hear, if you can think back to prior to arriving here in the DC area, what were your expectations, or going into this, what did you think about the opportunity? Was there any specific expectations you had? Just generally, what were you looking forward to, and what did you think was going to happen? And let's go in reverse order. Vinny, let's start with you.
Oh, yes. Yeah. So I guess I really didn't have any expectations one way or another. I just, when it was brought to my attention from the business agent, Rick Checa, when he mentioned it to me, it sounded exciting. It sounded like something I could really get involved in and look forward to, and it just get some more information in general and learn more. But as for expectations, I didn't have any either which way.
Kelsey, what did you think beforehand?
I also didn't have any expectations. I knew that we were going to be working on proposals for contractual language, new contractual language. I was excited, but no expectations. I mean, I'm always down to speak my opinion, so I was ready for it. But
That's true for sure. Linda?
So I participated in the LMOU negotiations earlier this year for my branch. So I guess I was kind of along the same line of thinking as far as coming up with proposals for contractual language and whatnot. I also thought it was going to be a little bit more long term, not so much a week, more like, a couple of meetings over time. So I'm glad to hear that it's not just our group, there's going to be other groups as well. So
Yeah, we'll talk some about what that future looks like. So the next one, Veronica, I'm going to go to you, but you all traveled in on Sunday, and then on Sunday night we got the whole group of 30 together, and I came out and gave kind of I guess you'd call it a high level or broad overview of the reasons we were doing this, and kind of what the expectations were. Just looking at the end of things, what we wanted you guys to produce. Talked a lot about the economic piece of collective bargaining, just a little bit of history in the process, just enough to give you information that, again, we'll dive into. But Veronica, what were your takeaways or memories, anything specific you want to share from that opening night on Sunday?
I specifically remember talks about pie. There was a lot of pie in there, especially when we were talking about the economic part of it. And I understood with collective bargaining that it was split between work rules and the economics, and how there was like, with the economics, if you want this amount, like, what are you going to do for us? Like, it wasn't just, I want this amount of money. It's, hey, I want this amount of money, and what can we do to like achieve that for the letter carriers? I kind of understood that. But when you were going into a lot more detail about what goes into that, and the um, other postal unions that you guys look at, and like economics or economists that you guys talk to in order to get the like large perspective of what, not just the economy that affects the post office, but the economy that's going on in the United States as a whole. So I thought that was really interesting. And with the work rules side, like, I understood that parts of the executive council like kind of helped you negotiate those rules, but I didn't realize like how like the subcommittees were. Like I didn't understand that they were like breaking down like the actual articles of the contract.
And, a couple things that you referred to, I think are important. We talked a lot about, it's not really for us and really for most letter carriers, it's not really a deep thought exercise to identify all the things that we want to achieve in bargaining. Like we all know what those are, right? What our large goals are economically. Of course, full COLAs at every step and higher starting pay and higher pay in the middle and higher ending pay and an all career workforce. And, like we can very easily line those up. But I think talking about the prioritization as negotiations play out, which you guys did a phenomenal job with later in the week, and we'll get to that here in just a minute. And then the other thing, thing I tried to point out that I think really played out during the week is that even on the work rule stuff, when we look at potential proposals and contractual changes, that nothing sits in isolation. We have to consider that if this change, what does it impact and what's the domino effect to other parts of the agreement or handbooks and manuals. And, I really wanted to stress that. And I was so proud, number one, but really impressed as well with the work that the committees did, including you guys in kind of a compressed period of time, which we'll also get into, but that you were really, really thorough. And that Sunday night session was designed just to give you some basic information. But then Monday, with our staff that was out there, they got into the details of how things would work throughout the week. The structure. So Kelsey, why don't you tell us about the structure they laid out as far as the committees and how each of the committees would operate, the discussions, and how those ideas would be, formulated, so to speak, and then documented. If you just take us through kind of what they laid out for you on Monday morning, that really, I think, charted the course for the work that you did the rest of the week.
Yeah, so they essentially told us that each group would be working on 4 subcommittees worth of articles. They told us they kind of left it up to us really to figure out, honestly. They gave us the article numbers that we were in charge of looking at. They told us to assign a recording secretary and a chair. It's up to us how we did that, if we kept the same person or switched it up. And then told us really they presented us with the information that they were providing us, the contracts from other postal unions, as well as all past resolutions. I bring my JCAM everywhere with me. So of course I had the JCAM, the old JCAM. Michelle's working on the new JCAM, we were told, but they kind of said, get to work. Yeah. Yeah. They said, get to work. In the next 3 days, you have 4 subcommittees worth of work to look at and discuss, write your proposals down, check the chair's notes for the day and the recording secretary's minutes, and make sure you have enough time to complete all the work. Let us go.
Yeah, and that was really important, that we wanted to give enough structure to make it efficient, since everyone was sort of coming together. Some people that were in the room knew one another because they had, met previously. Some didn't. But I also think it was really important to allow you guys to develop your own way of moving through these discussions. And you mentioned Michelle. We had 4 of our letter care staffers that work with me, Doug Lape, Tim McKay, Michelle McQuality, and Chris Henwood, that were out there with you guys the whole week. So your subcommittees, you guys are meeting for hours at a time on different topics. And as you mentioned, Kelsey, digging through a lot of the same information that our executive council subcommittee members are looking at. Official bargaining positions, resolutions that have been passed, other union contracts, previous proposals, of course, bringing your own ideas to the table. Vinny, why don't you tell the listeners just a little bit about what the role of those 4 headquarters staffers what they did out there throughout the week?
Sure. Like with Chris in our group, it was helpful to have him there so that if we needed a little bit of guidance and we're kind of maybe running into a rough patch, he would be able to give us a little bit more clarity of things that we were working towards. I don't want to say he was like kind of, sitting back and kind of watching us and watching this, our group work together and kind of grow and mold and just get through the entire week and doing so much. But it was great having him there. If I don't want to just say for moral support, but have him there if we needed to bounce some ideas off that maybe we were running flat on.
Yeah, and that was intentional. That they were to be there as a resource for you. Certainly, if people had questions, I know a lot of times you might talk about a particular topic, and there might be something they could provide as far as what's happened with that topic in previous rounds of bargaining that would be helpful, but in no way to drive the conversations. So, Linda, why don't you tell us a little bit about like how these things play out? You guys would have on each topic, you'd have a chair that I guess was sort of leading the group, and then you had someone designated as a secretary because we gave you a kind of specific way of documenting the discussions. But tell us how they play out. I mean, I'm sure not everyone agreed immediately, but just give us a sense of, as you discussed an issue, how these conversations happen, how those different perspectives came together to ultimately reach a consensus on different issues.
So I think just having such a diverse group of people, I mean, we had people from large offices or installations to smaller offices, and I think that perspective really helped us formulate a decent idea of what we needed going forward. I know initially it was difficult for us to stay within a good structure by ourselves. We started out with Article 8 and 41, and we just kind of wanted to immediately get into the discussion without looking at the other contracts. And so that's kind of what Chris helped us with. And throughout our time together, our chair and our secretary worked together to help us along that path as well. But as far as the discussions went, we didn't really have a whole lot of arguments, but it was difficult to take a step back and look at it from outside of our office instead of inside. And so, like I said, having that diverse group of carriers from all over with such different sized offices really helped provide perspective and play devil's advocate.
Very good. So, Veronica, on a particular topic, after you guys spent time, discussing and eventually reached a consensus about different things that we would want to potentially propose and how we would prioritize those things. Once that consensus was reached, and I guess this is kind of the role of the secretary that the group chose, for each topic. Tell us, like, what would be done with that idea? Like, how was it documented? And just explain that process to us a little bit, because that piece is really important as to how this information is used in the future, not just short term in this round of bargaining, but potentially in future rounds.
Well, I was initially voluntold by one of our co-members to be recording secretary, since that's a role that I play in my branch already. And I continued to be recording secretary for the entire week because all of my co-members felt like I was doing a really good job at recording the minutes. So I stayed in that role the whole time. And what I kind of did, as everyone started having ideas, like I kind of just wrote them down in the minutes. I wasn't writing every single thing that people were talking, because when we started an article, everyone would just kind of like throw ideas in at once. And then once we kind of decided which ones would be the ones we all agreed on, then I started writing down what everybody was kind of saying about the ideas. I know a couple people around me, like Kelsey and Casey from Oklahoma, were writing them down on their notepads. And that kind of helped me because it helped me be able to participate in the conversation and then come back to my minutes and kind of write down what they were writing down. And then once we kind of had our final discussion on it, we all wrote the ideas and we double checked with each other. Maybe we should write it like this. Maybe we should write it like that. And then we kind of just worked on it all together until all of our ideas for one singular article or topic was done.
Very good. So over the course of Monday afternoon, Tuesday, and Wednesday, that was kind of the exercise that you guys repeated with multiple topics. Just as I said, sort of replicating in a compressed period of time the work that our executive council subcommittee members are doing. Then on Thursday morning, we had you using this same process dig into the economic issues that I talked about out there on Sunday night. So, Vinny, I want to start with you about what you recall from the discussion on the economics within your group of 10. And then we'll talk about Thursday afternoon, which was where we had all three of the committees, all 30 together, and I thought was a really special time. So Vinny, let's start with you and Thursday morning in the discussion or middle of the day, whatever time it was, on the economics with the others in this particular committee.
So there certainly was a lot of ideas floating around in regards to Article 9 for sure. There was so many ideas, and I think the group did such a great job of coming together with ideas that we thought were very good, that are very strong. And we thought if we had more time towards the end, we could go back to whatever we thought there were maybe some other ideas that we could grow, add on to or strengthen or what have you. But all in all, in regards to discussions throughout the week, they were very positive. A lot of insight. Everybody was contributing, and again, with carriers from all over the country, and some carriers coming from larger offices and carriers in smaller offices. It was good to get that perspective, whether large or small offices, to add into this to drive it home.
So once that exercise was completed, there was something in the agenda that I assumed you were all looking forward to. I know everybody else was, and that was getting all 30 people together to share ideas that the three different subcommittees, the branch leaders, the contract enforcers, and you guys, I'm gonna come up with a better name than new members, I promise. I am next time. I know you were curious and anxious and really wanted to hear what they came up with. And I think there were priorities when it came to the work rules that were fairly consistent from one group to the other. But I thought, at least in the time I was there, that the discussion on like economic priorities was really productive, and hearing from the different perspectives. And Kelsey, you were a big part of that discussion. So I want to give you the opportunity to just share your recollection of it. And then I'm going to tell you my recollection of it, but I want to hear you first, because I thought you really brought a lot to that discussion.
I thought I went on a loose-lipped rant, honestly. I actually remember looking at my one of our group members, Peyton, and after I finished and I had seen you sitting up at the table, I looked at Peyton and I said, "When did he get here?" He said, "Right before you started that." I was like, "Oh God, okay." Yeah, I just went loose. I think general consensus with all three groups is that, and I know members across the country really is we need an all-career model. It's absolutely ridiculous that we don't have an all-career model yet. As mail carriers is the backbone of the Postal Service. Our group dug really deep in that. That was something we kind of, I'm very vocal, obviously. So that was something I made jokes about and touched on throughout the entirety of the week is, well, yeah, this wouldn't be an issue if it was an all-career model already, we recognize, I started out the conversation between our groups with walking in bright-eyed and bushy-tailed at 8 o'clock in the morning and said, who's good at math? And crickets in the room. And then about an hour later, as everyone else is waking up and we're all sharing ideas, I realized that I think I was the only one in the room that wasn't good at math. So everyone's throwing out numbers and doing math on how much it would cost to raise, the general wage increase to 2% across the board, and so on and so forth. And we're looking at just the 35,000 CCAs versus the 290 plus active carriers across the board, and the numbers were astronomical. I recognize that that's a big part of the spending. So with that being said, we all kind of agreed that the ultimate goal is to get an all-career model. I have a unique perspective personally. I started as a CCA. We started hiring PTS as a career model during COVID. We went back to hiring CCAs about 2 years ago, at the beginning of last year. During all of that time, I was giving academy presentations for the union to both CCAs and PTFs in the room at the same time. It's a hard pill to swallow to start a career with the Postal Service and know that you have to spend 2 years before any of that time adds towards your retirement, right? Especially when you've got veterans coming in, starting out as carriers at the Postal Service who already have so much time and already have a TSP started. We really, throughout the entirety of our week, focused on, if we can't get an all-career model, every proposal that is relevant, we put forward to get CCAs closer to the contractual rights that career employees have, because it'd probably be easier, once we start getting these contractual rights for CCAs closer to all career employees, that next time we go to collective bargaining and ask for an all-career model, might be easier. They've already got rights similar to career employees. But with that being said, yeah, I went on a rant. We all agreed in our group that we would be willing to concede quite a lot if it meant we could get an all-career model. And I think the newer members group, most of us are under 10 years in with the Postal Service. We have 20 plus years to go. I'm not going to lie and say I wasn't pissed with the last contract. I'm in that middle group that I didn't get a raise. I got the general wage increase. I got the COLAs. It's great. But I did not get anything else outside of that. I would be willing to do that again if it meant we get an all-career model. And that's not saying that I wouldn't be hurting still not being able to get a raise, but I think the ultimate goal is that, with that 20 plus years to go, if we give up a little bit now and get all career into our contract, that'll free up a lot more in the future, and allow us to gain more in future collective bargainings. And everybody starts career. I mean, that's something we've been struggling with for ever, is not having this all career model. I know there was some hiring of PTFs throughout the years in between TEs and CCAs, but those TEs, those CCAs, we're still fighting to get that time as buyback option back and added to our retirement. And the future of the Postal Service right now is it's looking pretty bleak. We're not hiring really great employees all across the board. We're not keeping employees. I think if we were able to raise the wages, if we were able to have an all-career model right off the bat, give these people these amazing retirement benefits, which is the reason a lot of people come to the Postal Service in the first place. The retention rates and the quality of employees that are applying, that it will improve. Absolutely. So, and honestly, like I said, I went on that rant in that room, but I think the general consensus with all three groups was an all-career model was necessary. So,
yeah, I'd say that's completely fair. That it was a priority for everyone. You know, when you line up all of the different pieces of the economic puzzle. Let me just share with you guys. I think I talked about this some in previous episodes of the podcast, but the thing that impressed me most listening to that conversation was you describe it as a rant. I would describe it as passionately advocating a priority, which, and to be fair, there were several people in the room that did that on different on different topics. But what really impressed me was, of course, everyone brings based on their own personal experience, where they are in their career. Oftentimes, not always, but oftentimes our peers, the people that we work with every day, are in relatively similar places in their career. So, you know, everybody brings their perspective, which translates often to their priorities. But what really impressed me is, despite the passion behind feelings about different pieces of the economic puzzle, whether it was all career workforce or pay at the top, or, you know, general increases or COLAs, or whatever, you know, piece might have been, you know, the thing that was most important to that individual. What really impressed me about the group is how everyone advocated for that, while at the same time really understanding the need to balance across the spectrum, regardless of where letter carriers are in their career. In other words, trying to, Kelsey, you mentioned in this last contract, for those that were not early in the pay scale, those who were not at top step, in the short term, the benefit to them was just general increases in COLAs. Obviously, step P increase will benefit them long term. You know, trying to spread the benefit as equitably as we possibly can, while looking not just at the present, but the future. And to me, it was just reflective of, when you look at the history of our union and the approach that we've taken to collective bargaining, it's always been very balanced, and it's always been with one eye, of course, on the short term, but also on the long term. And when you think of, you know, really while everybody in that room over the years just had a lot of time to think to themselves about these type things, it was actually a very short period of time that you guys spent as a group talking about that. And I was just so impressed with the depth of thought and understanding. It was really, really beneficial, you know, to me, and certainly, you know, the others in the room, and those that will read all the information that was put together. It'll be really, really beneficial to us in collective bargaining going forward. So I want to give you all an opportunity to answer the last two questions. And the first is a little bit general. I just think back over, you know, the course of the week. What are your overall sort of takeaways? Or I mean, your work is not over. I mean, we've got, you know, we're going to continue this with another group in the future. We potentially have some other things for you guys to work on. But just thinking back to that week, what's your recollection, and what positives do you take away from it? Linda, let's start with you.
Well, I think that the most surprising thing to me was that maybe the Postal Service would have shared interests. But the biggest takeaway as far as the entirety of the week is just how much every group agreed on. I know there was talk about mixing up the newer members with the contract enforcers with the branch leaders, and I think it was smart to keep them apart, because I don't think it would have affected our voice as much, but it really helped show that, hey, all three different types agree, and we agree on the same things throughout the week. So I thought that was really interesting.
That's a really good takeaway. That's very, because we did discuss that, the idea of, I don't know, cross pollinating or whatever term you want to use. And I think the consensus that was reached on a number of topics with separation really just makes the conclusion even stronger. And if that makes any sense, in my opinion. Veronica, what do you take away?
I'm kind of along the same lines as Linda. We, were able to work together and mostly in agreement. And, we had some moments where, we were having a hard time kind of getting an idea together because one person was advocating so much for one thing, whereas, we were advocating for the other. And in the big group, I mean, again, everybody agreeing, even though we have different levels of experience and knowledge, everyone was, most notably, the sick leave dependent care was a huge hit. I mean, I don't have any children or parents to care for at this time. And I didn't know that you could only use 80 hours of that for coverage. And we did the math, and that's only, I think it was like 6 hours per month to cover for sick leave dependent care. And I was shocked by that. But every single group, the contract enforcers and the branch presidents were like, we need to increase that. One of our group members, Amanda, she has 4 kids, and she's like, sometimes I have months where I need to call out for 20 hours because one kid's got a broken foot, the other one needs to get braces. And I just thought that was really shocking. And one thing that I did really like coming from national is you guys really just let us do our own thing. Like when it came to like our breaks and our lunches and how we wanted to do things, it was like, go ahead and just do it. Let's see what you come up with. And I just thought that was really awesome for us to be able to just not do whatever we want, but like come up with a way that works for our group.
Very good. That's easy to do when you have the right people. You guys are certainly the right people. Vinny, what are your recollections or takeaways from the week?
Not to sound like a broken record here by any means, but I think just not just the quantity of the resolutions that we came up with, but the quality of those resolutions was really, really impressive. And I did like that we stayed as a group. We didn't get mixed up. I mean, we came together at the end, of course, but we stayed with our group. We built that rapport. There was so much back and forth in a positive manner. It was really, I was very impressed. I felt, I don't want to say like energized by it, but just seeing everybody work together and for a common goal is what really impressed me. And like you mentioned, Brian, about working towards that all-career workforce, and that's what was really important to us, because I believe that of the group of the newer let me try that in English, the newer members, we were all CCAs, I think, at one point or another anyways. So it was really great to have that camaraderie and work together and come up with all those ideas and just, again, working towards that common goal.
Excellent. Kelsey?
I loved getting everybody else's perspective, honestly, being in the group brain. I'm a Formal A rep for a very large installation, and that's essentially all I know. I've been doing Formal A. I carry sporadically and typically Saturdays and Mondays, but I'm usually Formal A the rest of the week. And I only know issues in big installations. It was really cool to say, I'm hungry for knowledge. I'm always like, send me training. I want to hear this. I want to hear that. I love constructive criticism. I'm always calling Step B and tell me what I'm doing wrong. Tell me what to fix, So, and I also love talking about the contract as well and getting other people's perspectives. So being able to sit in a room with people from all over the country, some who started as PTS, some who started as CCA, some from very, very small installations, others in large installations like myself. It was awesome to hear their perspectives, to throw. And there were a couple of times I threw something out there and I had people right across from me be like, absolutely not. This is how this would affect me and my installation, or someone else would say something and I'd be in there pounding my fist on the table, like, absolutely not. No, not at all. That's not going to work. So that was, I think, my favorite part of it. Obviously, yes, we did all all three groups really had kind of a general consensus, similar ideas as to what the issues were, the main issues, and what needed to be changed. But it was really cool being able to sit in that room with my peers and kind of enlightening, I guess, to the bigger picture as to how it would affect the membership nationwide versus what I come in there saying we need to change because of my situation specifically. So I think that was really cool. Absolutely.
Excellent. Okay, one last thing. We are going to have a different group of 30 probably come in January and do basically the same exercise with maybe a few tweaks based on feedback we got from you guys at the end of the week, and we appreciate that. But for those that will participate in that group, I want to give you an opportunity to offer any advice you would give them ahead of time. And we have called this committee the newer members because apparently no one can come up with a better name for it. But if you guys have suggestions for a better name, let's hear those suggestions too. So what advice would you give to the next group of 30, and what should we call the newer members group? And we'll go in reverse order. Kelsey, we'll start with you.
I'll keep you posted on suggestions. You threw that one at me. Let me think
It's
about
hard.
that. But it is hard. It is hard for sure. I don't think that anybody I sat in the room with though is a newer member. There were some that had only been employed for 2 years, honestly. So yes, technically you could call them that, but they had just as many great things to bring to the table as
No, absolutely. I
you
guess they were
know,
newer
it was-
members in comparison to the other two groups, but
Yeah,
they
yeah.
certainly were not newer
Right,
members.
absolutely. But with that being said, advice to the next group, just come prepared to work, recognize that everybody in the room has a voice. I think we started our group out with a couple people across the table who were shy and kind of quiet. And then there were, of course, like my side of the table that was just loud and ready to chat. So, pull those people into the conversation, because once we started getting those individuals opening up, man, did they have some really, really great things to say. So, don't dominate the conversation, and everybody has a voice, and be respectful, and just have an open mind. Come prepared to listen.
Excellent. Well said. Vinny, advice for the next group and any suggestions for a new name?
Well, for a new name, nothing's really coming to mind. I'm sure if I sleep on it, maybe something will come about. But I would say as well, come in with an open mind, get ready to listen. Hearing everybody's ideas it will help you shape your own opinion about things too. Hearing it from different parts of the country really makes a big difference. Also, it's easy to get excited with your ideas and want to tell everybody and put them out there, and that's great too. But there's times where you're just gonna have to, take a step back, listen, let everybody else get their ideas out there as well, and work together on that. Because again, it is an exciting thing to talk about things that are important to you and important to the people around you. And coincidentally enough, we found that it's within the three groups that we had. We all really had the same ideas, or we had similar ideas, and found things that are very important to us that were similar as well. So I would just say, make sure that you're listening and just take it all in, and don't get too excited that you trip over your own words.
Well said. All right, Veronica, advice for the next group, and I bet you have a name suggestion.
I kind of have a name suggestion. It's not like, I don't really think it's much better than what it's called now, but instead of saying newer members, I think it should be like new-ish members, because it's like
That's
we're
better.
not newer, like we're kind of new. Like I've only been at the Postal Service for 5 years, so I'm like kind of new, but not like I got here last month new. So I'm like new-ish,
Good. We may have to look for just incremental improvement here. So thanks for the suggestion.
Of course. I was third to answer, so I, had some time to think. As far as Advice. I mean, since we didn't really know what we were getting into, I kind of didn't really know what to expect. So, I mean, I kind of told my branch, I was like, I don't know what I'm going to be doing up there. So I'll let you know when I come back, I guess. Don't be afraid to ask your members in your branch what they think is kind of like a bigger issue besides pay. Like, we understand that pay needs to get better, but in the contract itself, like, is there an article that they know of that they think should be improved? Or, um, you know, maybe ask your formal A representative or your branch president, or if you work for a state association, to kind of ask around. Like, I wouldn't ask everybody, but like ask around to the people that you know who know the contract, and say like, hey, is there something about the contract that you don't necessarily like, and if you had a chance to change it, what would you change? I would have liked to have gotten that perspective from some of my stewards in my branch, because they're very smart, and I definitely think they have more knowledge than I do when it comes to the contract. So I would say ask around in your branch to see if there's anything that they would like to say, and bring that to the table.
Very good. All right. And Linda, finally, advice for the next group, and let's see what your suggestion is for the name.
I guess I don't really have a great suggestion for the name, but maybe something like future leaders or future enforcers or something. But as far as advice for the next group, I would definitely say remember that this isn't the only voice you have. You know, we utilized the resolutions going all the way back to 1970. And so, you know, don't think that this is your only chance to have an opinion, because you can bring that to your branch, to your state convention, to the national convention, and you can have your voice heard that way. So don't think this is your last and only chance or anything like that.
That's a really good point. You know, I have no doubt that all the people that the 30, including you guys, that participated in this, you know, there's probably no one that was there that got every single idea related to collective bargaining out of their head and into this process. That would be impossible. We'd be there for years. So I think that's a really good point. And, you know, the future group, I think, doing what you guys did, and that is, you know, being efficient in the way you worked, and getting to a place where ultimately, you know, what's important as far as bargaining is everyone's ideas being put together, everyone working together to, you know, produce the product, so to speak, that we really wanted. And we got that. And that's going to be really useful for our preparation, as I said, not just for this round of bargaining, but, you know, into future rounds. Well, I want to thank you all, of course, for joining us on the podcast. You did a fantastic job. Thank you for your participation in the week that we had here a few weeks ago. And I think we've also probably going to put you to work a little bit more during this prep process over the next couple of months. So thanks so much for joining us. We appreciate you guys.